That's something that I always got stuck on and get stuck on is like, oh, like I wanted the video to have like this perfect little, this perfect little thing. The text just isn't right. Like for whatever reason, that has always been a hang up for me. And it's just something that you have to be like, that's not important right now,
Right.
It can get better next week. It can get better next month. It can get better 2 years from now. Right. And that kind of growth is okay. And it's important. And I think that it kind of applies to this concept of like, just ship something and get it out there.
You are now listening to the Creative Juice podcast brought to you by Entrepreneur.io.
What's up, Indies? Welcome back to the Creative Juice podcast. I am your hostess, Corrin Campbell. With me is your host, Jack McCarthy. How's it going, Jack?
It is going fantastic. Hello, Creative Juice. How are you all doing? I hope you're having a lovely, lovely week.
Lovely week. Well, I'm excited for today's episode, but I wanted to quickly address a couple of comments that came in about the last episode. Most specifically that there were a lot of people that are upset about saying that YouTube ads don't work, which first off, we didn't say. But secondly, just to be clear, a lot of the stuff that came in, or a lot of the stuff we were talking about, my results that we were talking about, a lot of it was centered around my free plus shipping and handling funnel, which means that we were largely running for conversions. So we did touch on, me running to Spotify as well. But I just wanted to stress, as a matter of importance, that was more specifically talking about making sales. And I definitely don't want anyone to think that we're like putting some hard line in the sand about any of these platforms being crap. We're not making any comments on their organic efforts. And it doesn't necessarily mean that other strategies can't work on those platforms. It was just sharing the results of the stuff that I was testing. So please don't feel like it's an attack or that we mean you're dumb if you're running ads on those platforms. It doesn't mean any of that. I just wanted to get that out there because we have a lot of debates that come up about YouTube ads, especially.
I know we're mean, but I don't think we said anything mean on that episode in particular.
No.
And just to unpack this for a second for everybody, if that triggered you, it's one test, one very specific kind of test that we were talking about that Corrin had done. One test. Right. So I keep repeating that it was one test because, one test is one test. It's not the road sign for whether you go towards something or you don't. Just, just an exploratory. That's all.
Absolutely. I mean, it's really all about, and I likely have more experience than some people listening to this podcast. And there are likely people listening to this podcast who have more experience than me. And there are people with a lot of experience that I listen to, so it's just to share information and have things going back and forth. So that doesn't mean that you can't comment on a video like, hey, I had different results. Like, we're not going to like come on and scold you. It's not the point of this. It's important to me that y'all know that it's a very pragmatic process. Constantly looking for ways to innovate. And, definitely don't feel like we are not typically line drawn in the sand type of people because the world changes, everything shifts. And that's how we constantly view the tests that we run and the campaigns we're running. So anyway, I just wanted to address that because I don't want anyone to ever feel like we're out here trying to, be the ruler or dictate anything as far as how things are. It's just sharing any test that we have.
Definitely not trying to rain on your marketing parade. I
know, right? So anyway, disclaimer aside, I'm excited for today's episode because today we're going to be talking about what is the MVP of your music career. And when we talk about that, you might think, oh, most valuable player, it's me. And it is. But what we're actually talking about is a business principle called minimum viable product. And some of you may be familiar with this and some of you may not. So I'm excited to dig into it. And, Jack, you have experience working with companies that are not artists, right? Mm-hmm. You've done a lot brick and mortar and a lot of online businesses. And so an MVP is probably something that you are very familiar with.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a well a well carried term in my brain for sure over a long time of doing a lot of different kinds of marketing.
Right. And, I think that this is inspired by my own folly for sure, because I am definitely someone who tends to be a little extra, if you haven't picked up on that. And sometimes I get I get way deeper into things than maybe I should, or maybe I overcommit myself and then I'm exhausted or burn out because I've been, trying to do too many things. So there's a lot of different places that this can apply. But essentially, when we're talking about a minimum viable product, we're talking about what is the bare minimum, so to speak, that you can do that makes a product or service a viable product to sell to people. And it doesn't mean bare minimum like how lazy can you be? It just means what is, instead of like expanding all of these features to, have 50 different options, or like if you're running print on demand shirts in your store, do you really need to have every size and every color and every,
Yep. That's a great first example to lead with.
Well, merch is going to be, obviously the first place I focus. So, so Jack, I'd like to hear any examples you may have of not an MVP version of merchandising.
Well, goodness, I was going to start with online stores, e-commerce stores in particular, because, we audit a lot of stores, either when we're talking to people who might be interested in working with us at IndieX, or when we take on artists and they come onto our roster and we're, running our first week audits with them and really checking into what's happening and what's working. Something that we do come across a lot of, and I'm just gonna kind of use your little tip off there as an on-ramp to talk about this, because that was what I wanted to go with.
Awesome.
Something we see a lot of is exactly that, is, a store with a crap ton of products on it, shirts of multiple colors with multiple colors of designs, and hats and bottles and cups and mugs and stickers and all sorts of stuff, and none of it sells.
Right.
That's something that we see a lot of, and I get it. Artists are creative people. Creatives are creative people, and you dream up all sorts of cool stuff. And it's so easy to have any merch design, at your fingertips, able to be able to have it printed really quickly with Printful or Printify or any other on-demand provider out there. But that is something that we see a lot of, that, it's a store that is, instead of it being a minimum viable product that then customers can, pick something up and give feedback on and tell you what they love and tell you what they don't love. It's an overblown mess of too many products that nobody buys because they get there and they're overwhelmed at what they're looking at. A paradox of choice kicks in. And that's a big area where, when it comes to monetization, we see creatives kind of, I guess, put the cart before the horse a little bit. And instead of having, one offer or two offers, they've got 10 products and no offer
Right.
and nobody buying anything and no customers. So scaling back and having an offer to make to your fans is often something that we talk about. That's also something that we get into when we talk about, building sales funnels. Running sales promotions as an artist, having a dedicated offer that you're making to your fans, not just, go check out the store. There's a bunch of stuff and it's marked down and, no real clear directives. That's what I start to think about when I start to think about how to strip back the layers of the chaos that you can sometimes create and, start thinking about or giving yourself homework on building a minimum viable product. That's just one kind of starting point. I've definitely got some other ideas, but what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, you guys have heard me harp about print on demand, and the margins and how they're so terrible and whatever, but if you aren't moving a significant amount of apparel, for example, buying a full run of shirts with all size options, even if it's only one color, it might not be a practical thing for you to do with the investment, that you're trying to make in your career. And I want that to be communicated. Like, print on demand is a solution in some situations that makes more sense than printing it. Even if the margin is lower, you still have to look at, okay, well, if I, do an order of shirts with all these sizes and I, pay $750, but I only sell a small portion of them, your cost per t-shirt goes up significantly because that backstock is now just not moving, right? So in theory, if you're doing math after okay, it's been a year and I've sold only 10 of these shirts, that cost per shirt pretty much comes to $75. You know what I mean?
Yep. Because
there's a point where it's you just at that point need to take the hit on the cost of goods and sum up to how many you've sold. So there is, that's still 3 times what it would cost you to do with print on demand, right? So, there are situations where it makes sense. Also, if you're testing out a design, you're like, well, I'm not sure, maybe you do actually move a reasonable amount of merch in your store every month, but you don't know if people are going to like a design, but you really want to try it. Well, there's 2 things. You can have them vote on it, right? You can survey them. That can be hard sometimes if your fans aren't super engaged and you don't have a cool bribe or reason that they should fill it out. You just might not get the feedback because there's no initiative and people just don't do surveys. I don't know how many surveys I get from all of the e-com companies that I order from, but I don't fill them out, which is terrible because I should be the person who does do it. But, but I don't do those. So that's one way to test. And the other way to test is to do print on demand. And if there's a lot of demand, then go ahead and order a run of them, So, but all those things said, the reason why print on demand in my mind is actually one of the hardest traps to fall into is for exactly what Jack is saying. In that, as artists, I think we feel pressure. Everything that we do is about this keeping up appearances thing, right? Indie musicians are constantly just trying to look like the big guys. And, I think that whether it's social media, whether it's Spotify numbers, whether it's, I have a manager, all of these things, we are trying to keep up with the Joneses. And so there's pressure to have this full store. And you're like, well, if I don't have to pay for it ahead of time, what does it hurt? And it's well, it does hurt because first, there's 2 reasons, right? One is this paradox of choice that Jack is mentioning, which is that people get to your store and they're like, oh my gosh, what do I even order? And they're shopping around. And next thing you know, they've spent maybe 25 minutes on your store and they're still looking. That's a long time to try to then make a decision, right? They're not shopping for a television here, right? It's apparel. So there's firstly that thing. But the second is that you are diluting the data you could get on stuff you could order to no longer have it in on demand, right? Essentially. So there's 2 things there that I think that's where print on demand gets me. And that's where you want to come up with the minimum viable product, right? It's okay, I have this shirt in black. That's it. I have it in these sizes. You want to facilitate sizes of all, different shapes and forms of your fans. But that's it. This is black. It's a white design on a black t-shirt. And if the design sells really well, it's okay, well now I'd love to do a red design on the same red design on a black shirt or whatever, right? And so that's the difference between an MVP and going 2 extra with it, is that the MVP allows you to make, basically remove the variables, just like it's a scientific experiment. Remove the variables so that you can be okay, does this offer work? Okay, it does. Well, maybe now I can expand upon that and have another similar offer and then expand that, right? So I think merchandising is one of the hardest things to, be MVP. Dude, with my greatest hits album, yes, I did a limited edition, I did a deluxe edition, I did a standard edition. They were all very complex. And did it allow me to charge, $50 for a limited edition version? Absolutely. And that was great that I had these tiers of options, but it also was such a project. You know what I mean? Like I was making all of these add-ins and making the boxes and stuff. And in some situations that can be a very beneficial thing to, offer your more hardcore fans. But if you are still in the progress of building out an offer or developing a piece of merch that you're not sure how your audience is going to respond to it yet, you just made a crap ton of work for yourself that may not result in what you actually can sell,
Yeah, that's such a good point. And, I think this comes into play a little deeper into your business as well. I see this a lot. And, we kind of touched on this in another episode, actually, now that I'm thinking about it. We talked about it in the episode where we touched on membership sites and how to avoid overwhelm.
Oh my gosh, that was my next example.
Yeah, I think we're firing on the same plane today. This is great.
For sure, buddy.
It's so interesting that just in the same way that with an e-commerce store, with an online store, you can fall into the trap of over planning, over preparing for a future that may not even be realized in something like building a membership site, which then, kind of often I see it paralyze artists and get them stuck and kind of just making excuses as to why they're not, moving on something. It's like, I need to come up with all the content to fill each and every one of these tiers with something special. I need to develop the merch for 7 different tiers for my Patreon or my membership site or whatever it is. And, really the minimum viable product for a membership site, depending on your fan base, depending on your customer base, it could be, anywhere from 1 to 3 levels. And that's just fine.
Right.
And, that's what a minimum viable product for membership can look like. And in fact, I might have even mentioned it on that episode. A lot of the artists that we work with at the agency, the membership sites that I see perform the best and retain their customers and consistently get new customers are the ones that are constantly innovating. Instead of trying to make it perfect on the first go around, they are constantly improving it as they go. There's a huge difference. And I think that's a really solid example of where you can apply MVP concepts to your music career is in something like building a membership site or a Patreon or whatever you want to call it.
Right. Yeah. That was something I went through in my membership site setup. I was like, okay, I got all these tiers all the way, and I currently have my membership site has 4 tiers with 1 free one. And I found myself just adding on and adding on and adding on. And the things that I was adding on to these higher tiers had a lot to do with the production of the next album. But the production of the next album hadn't started yet. And which is especially okay, I'm going to live stream from the studio for this tier. But then it also started to link my creative path and what was going to happen naturally, the timeline of that was linking that to something people were paying for. So if I hit a week of writer's block and wasn't going to be in the studio, now I'm kind of ripping people off, right? Because they paid for something that isn't going to be delivered. So, making sure that some of these products aren't contingent upon your process, making sure that it's something that you already have or that you've already delivered or is already scheduled or whatever. I think that was a lesson learned. So originally when I had put together the membership tiers for my site, there were 7, including the free one. Now there's 4, and 4 is still a lot. But, but it definitely, I was talking about launching with 7, and that was the wrong plan. And, I don't remember what episode it was. Maybe Jack, you can snipe it real quick because you're always so fast with it. But we had a discussion about my membership and how I kind of gotten overwhelmed, and it put me in a state of freeze. This is something I should have launched a long time ago. And if I had done it 3 years ago with just 1 paid tier, I'd have been a lot better off than trying to make this happen, in the way that I was approaching it. this time around. So fortunately, I cut the fat and I got it down to 4, which honestly is probably still more than I needed. But, you know, but whatever. Like, it's done, it's fine.
That's a fun recap, actually, because I don't think we've talked about that since, I don't think we've really talked much about memberships since we did that episode. And by the way, that was episode 155, and we'll link to it in the show notes so you guys can check it out. Because there's some good stuff in there for sure on this topic, which is really cool. You know, I want to pivot for a second, though, and talk about something that we haven't touched on just yet, because I feel like we might have some listeners that are hearing this and they're like, okay, yeah, guys, MVP online stores, MVP membership sites. I don't even have customers yet. I'm just trying to get my music off the ground. What about my content? What about my artistry?
Yes.
You know, what about my social media presence and my videos and all of that good stuff?
I was just going here too. Dude,
yeah,
we are so on track this day.
Yeah, very good today. Very good.
Very good today.
And I think that this is an important point to touch on, because I think a lot of artists get stuck here, myself included. I have definitely been known to get stuck in like content perfectionism and then find myself making excuses for why I'm not putting out, regular content, whether it be music or videos or whatever. Definitely have gotten stuck in that trap myself.
I'm so guilty of this. I mean, I might be more guilty of this than anyone on the planet. Like, there are a couple of things, like, I've mentioned before, I only have like 65 posts on my Instagram. And largely, like, I post more than that, but then I archive a bunch of it. And I say that that's because I want my IG to be kind of like a billboard situation, where if someone goes to my profile, all they're seeing is the stuff I want them to see. Anything that's like very time sensitive or just is more of a, more filler content or whatever, I archive, because people don't need to see that after I post it. That's true. Okay. That's true. But also, there are more factors to it. And one of it being that I am, really, to be honest, this podcast is one of the first times maybe ever that I've ever had my image on the internet without a full face of makeup. I happen to be wearing makeup today. If you are on YouTube, I feel cute. But in reality, I am very sensitive about my public image. And, especially as a woman, I feel a lot of pressure to look a certain way. And I'm working through that. So, ladies, don't leave me. You don't have to leave me any comments about it. But, there's I want to look a certain way. Or like I wanted to lose 5 pounds, or I wanted to have the right camera, or if I'm going to do Twitch, like I need to have the cool overlays that all the people on Twitch do. Or if I'm going to live stream, I need to have the cool, the stuff that all of the live streamers do. Whether it's the overlay, whether you're using OBS or something more fancy, or if the audio is great or whatever. And all of those things are just barriers to putting something out there,
Yeah.
And that's why, I'm telling you guys, but I'm telling myself, if you try to set the bar for yourself too high, firstly, you may never deliver the thing, right? Which you'd be better off just starting now with less. But secondly, you could set yourself up to have an amazing scale of improvement, most improved does count. There is something there. And, people will identify some of the YouTubers that have been huge for a long time, they will do reaction videos to the first video they did, or to, how is it different from 2 years ago or whatever. And they'll show off their lighting and their camera or the equipment they have and how it's different now, and it's all just a conversation line. It's just aging. If you take a picture of a child's face from the time that they're 5 to the time that they're 15, that's interesting to look at, And so I think we all need to embrace that about even just our content or our live stream. It's just so necessary as part of the career that we've chosen. And so getting over having everything look perfect, or having the right equipment, or having the perfect content for it to, having the perfect And when I say content, I mean the thing you are capturing. Having that perfect is just going to keep you from executing. And the thing is, once you get good at executing it at not the perfect level, you'll be faster when it does get closer to perfect, skill sets that kind of build upon each other. And so, yeah, I was thinking that exact thing as you were saying it, Jack, because I'm guilty.
Yeah, I mean, all the points you made are totally true. Two things kind of immediately come to mind for me with this. The first thing being, well, three things really. The first thing being that one, when we're talking about a minimum viable product, when it comes to your content, I want to lead this with a disclaimer. This is not a license to just put out like junk, right? Like,
right.
It should have a level of quality that you're proud of, not just like, oh, I threw something together and hope that people care about it. It's not that. It's definitely not that. You see enough garbage online that you should have a critical eye and a critical filter between like bad and objectively bad and like minimum viable product. Right. I want to just state that as a kind of disclaimer here.
Yeah, good call.
But what you were talking about skill sets kind of building upon each other, Corrin, is interesting because I think going back to what we were saying about iterating on a membership site and changing it and allowing it to grow and being innovative, that same kind of thing applies to your content. I know much like you mentioned about YouTubers, there are artists out there too that like if you go back to their old content, maybe on YouTube or like you scroll through IG and you find old posts, a lot of times like, especially with like, I'm going to use boy bands for example here. Like you'll see like, oh, this is like, fetus video, meaning like when they were like a baby band and nobody knew who they were. And, like the quality of the content might not be like super high caliber or anything like that. It's still, it's probably native to the platform, which is great and fine. And we probably have beaten that horse into the ground one too many times. Sorry, animal things. I know we try to avoid that. But that is just, allowing yourself to grow into what you want your content to eventually end up being is a really cool thing to be able to do. To one, see for yourself. For two, allowing your fans to see. And what triggered me on this, Corrin, was you made the point about like on Twitch having like the little banners on your video. Like that's something that I always got stuck on and get stuck on is like, oh, like I wanted the video to have like this perfect little thing. The text just isn't right. Like for whatever reason, that has always been a hang up for me. And it's just something that you have to be like, that's not important right now.
Right.
It can get better next week. It can get better next month. It can get better 2 years from now. Right. And that kind of growth is okay. And it's important. And I think that it kind of applies to this concept of like, just ship something and get it out there. And then the third thing I want to touch on is like, this is a little different today, I would say, because like the accessibility of recording has become super democratized and anybody can have a studio in their house. And, with solid practice and a lot of work, you can become a great engineer. But you listen to some records that you probably like of artists that you dig, for years and years and years, and you probably can listen back to their older stuff, their oldest, maybe their first record, their second record, whatever it might be, and compare it to more recent albums or singles or whatever. And you can hear like they allowed for growth, that minimum viable product doesn't just apply to content or merch or deeper things in the buddy system. It applies to your music as well. Like, one record is not going to sound like the next, and hopefully each and every record subsequently sounds better than the last. And I think that that's important too, because you can get really hung up on like, oh, the music just isn't perfect. If I just did one more thing in the mix, it will be right. Or, oh, if I just, sent this out to a different mastering engineer, it'll be perfect. No, it won't. It definitely will not. It will not be perfect, and you should probably just put it out.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is, it applies to so many things. I mean, touring, right? If you're just starting with touring, or you're just starting with shows, or you're just starting with house concerts, like do that. Do a house concert, do a local deli. And like some people listening to this are like, well, yeah, duh. but there's a ton of pressure to like have tours look a certain way. And in that kind of situation, like if you try to, sell a 15 city tour in, 250 cap venues, but you haven't done touring before, like that's a huge change, So like starting off, if you're doing your first tour, like starting off with 5 cities, there's nothing wrong with that. You know what I mean? There's like, never feel like you just have to look like something. So if it's touring, if it's packaging, like there's so many situations where this is true. So in order to not have this episode go forever, because, oh my gosh, I could talk about this kind of stuff forever. How about we do something actionable here, which is that, how we determine what the MVP is, right? And I think that this is where we come back to the conversation that we've talked about before. We've talked about the who and the why, right? Not necessarily understanding the blueprint of something as much as you understand why things in a blueprint are existing and what they're supposed to do. Why are you doing this? And is that still achieved even without bells and whistles, right? If you put out a crappy version of a song, like, and you're doing like what Jack's saying not to do, which is like just putting stuff out there like crap, it's probably not serving your why. It's probably not going to achieve the reason you put that out there in the first place, right?
Yeah.
But if you want to go live on Twitch and you don't yet have an overlay, the why is still going to be served, right? Like what you're trying to do will still happen. And I think that's where you can kind of delineate what MVP is and then add, little layers like a cake as you go.
That's such a good way of putting it. Like your why is kind of that critical objective eye that I was talking about when it comes to anything that you put out, whether it's content, like the why behind it should be sort of your guiding North Star of like, does this serve the purpose that I'm trying to achieve? And if it doesn't, then this probably isn't the thing that I want to be putting out there.
Right.
If you're putting out like, I'm just gonna throw out a silly example. Like if you are putting out a video and maybe you wanted to put out some content on IG or something, and it's you playing, but you're playing like all the way across the street and all you can hear is cars and you can't really see you, but like you needed to put something up today. Well, that probably doesn't serve your why if you're trying to use your channel for demonstrating your art. Like,
right.
You know what I mean?
Exactly. Yeah, I think that's where, so when you are thinking about an MVP, whatever part of your career you're addressing, I think that's where it's really important to outline the objective, and I say why, but it's kind of interchangeable with what. And I know typically we're like, who, what, where, when, why, how, but like the why and the what for me are very similar in that it's like, why am I doing this thing? It's to cause this, right? It's to cause what, and is that accomplished? And understanding like, this is meant to be evolutionary, right? I mean, Innopreneur's MVP was on ClickFunnels. Like Cirque put FanFinder method on a ClickFunnels site. That was Innopreneur's MVP. We are obviously not there now, and so we've slowly stacked and grown, and now we've got a whole team, and we've got a team of full-time and part-time and contractor employees, and we offer a range of different things. And Indie Pro is a thing now, whereas before all we had, FanFinder was a one-time purchase product, and that was it. And so I think that's the kind of thing that you have to focus in on. What's the objective? Am I kickstarting something? Is this a new concept? Is this achieving something with my fan base that I've never done before? I think, when you're thinking about MVP, same thing, like for me, MVP also applies to ads, to email campaigns, to how I'm marketing. It's like, okay, I could test 35 different variables, which audience, which creative, which copy, which this, right? But there's a point where it's like, if you get stuck too much in trying to figure out all of the variables and the ways it could be better at one time, you're not going to achieve your why because you'll never launch that campaign. So instead, do your best. Be like, okay, I think I've got my copy. I think I've got the right creative. I think I've got the right audience. Maybe test a couple audiences against each other, but don't test 50. Test a couple, right? And that way you can be like, nope, this for sure doesn't work. Maybe this does work. And now I can build upon what I've learned with the thing that did work, you know? So I think that that's something that, same thing with if you guys have seen in the Indie Pro membership, if you would like to join, obviously you can go to our website and there's a link in the show notes, but you're already on our site if you're on the show notes. In Indie Pro, there is a section called Ground Reports. And in one of the Ground Reports, which is basically a monthly kind of mini training, I go over some of my ascension strategies in my email provider, which I also kind of use as a customer relationship management tool. I have built out excessive ascension funnels, like so many emails, and Drip also connects to my ads, and there's all of these ascension offers, all of these different products, but it didn't start there. I started with one thing and I was like, okay, this is really cool. Does this work? Okay, that worked out. And what if I add this, right? And slowly you're building it up over time. So that's kind of the idea. And to me personally, just as a musician and as a person and as a woman who's trying to manage a lot of stuff, I think this is beneficial because it keeps me from burning out. And I still have to be reminded of it on a regular basis, when I'm looking at developing a new merch kind of collection, maybe for the summer, I'm like, I want to offer something that is more summer clothing and has kind of a specialty to it. I have friends, including Jack, who will be like, but do you need all of that? Or could you just pare it down a little? And I find that my blood pressure goes down, my stress level goes down, I ship it, I actually deliver it, and then people are interested, but I could never get there without the consistent thought process of being like, okay, am I being extra? I need to be this extra?
The phrase often the phrase "do less" often pops into my mind. It's like, you don't need all that,
right?
Like, now you're just showing off, you know.
Well, that happens to another good way to kind of nail into your MVP, right? Is to be like, if I, for example, when I was thinking about my vinyl, I had a lot of versions in my head. In the end, my gilded vinyl, it has a limited edition, a deluxe edition, and a standard, which is still extra, but it's okay. But it's okay because my people are segmenting and buying the 3 different things. But I tested that with my greatest hits stuff. Originally I had 5 tiers of different things for this. And I eventually, I was like, okay, if I were to be the most extra, what would this look like? And I basically plotted that out on paper. And then I was like, okay, what is the minimum? Like if I only could have, one of these things, like what is the baseline of what this needs to be? What are the features in theory that could be added, right? And with the vinyl, obviously I'm offering a tier all at the same time. It released all at once. But nonetheless, it's like, okay, well, what's the baseline? What's the mid of this? Is the top of this feasible? Do I need all these things in the middle? And outlining that kind of stuff not only gives you an idea of if you're trying to take on too much, but it also means that you're brainstorming for what you can add to that minimum viable product when you finally resolve to it. Now you've already done your homework for, okay, how do I add another membership tier? How do I make this a deluxe edition? You've now outlined that so that you have less work for yourself in the future, and it gives you a vision to work for.
Constant improvement, I think, is like, an important part of this. As musicians, this is something that we should inherently know because you're constantly, especially if you've played an instrument since you've been growing up, or you've been singing since you've been growing up, or writing since you've been young, any of those, you latch on to the idea of constant gradual improvement. Mm-hmm. And for some reason it goes out the window when you start to think about like growing your business
Right.
or doing any of the smaller pieces of growing a business that we've talked about today, whether it's building a store or building a membership site or putting out your content. All of a sudden, all of the like, make sure you practice for 30 minutes a day, that goes out the window for some reason,
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, take it from a person who's been at the forefront or at the ground zero of a few different businesses or programs, right? Whether it's Indepreneur or my music career or the music marketing program I developed for the Army or a small tech startup that I'm working on now. Which is kind of inspired this episode because I'm having to rein myself in, even in that, But as someone who's done a lot of these different things for a while, trust me, you will save yourself time, money, and effort if you can figure out that MVP and set all of the extras that you'd like to add to that MVP as future goals for that product. And also prioritize them. Decide like, okay, what would be the next thing that I could add? What would be the lowest hanging fruit as far as money, effort, and time that I could add to what I've currently got? Okay, then what's the next thing, And as you do that, I think it will, especially on the money part, man, because it's amazing how quickly you can blow money on new gear or on, adding new tech stack pieces or whatever it is. It's amazing how quickly that stuff adds up. And the next thing you know, you've got way more expenses than you've got revenue from whatever that thing is you were developing.
Yeah, it's so true. I think you said it super well. You should future pace yourself and do that early on.
Yeah.
Don't feel the need to front load all of the value that you could possibly stack into something. You want to make your offers cool, obviously. You want to make your offers irresistible, obviously. But do they need to be, the final version of it on, point one? No.
Right. Absolutely. So hopefully that's helpful. If nothing else, just spurs some thoughts in your mind of how you can take your products, take some pressure off yourself, forgive yourself for imperfection, stop making excuses, and get some stuff launched. So that's all I got today for our MVP episode. You got any final last words, Jack?
I've got nothing else besides get rolling, get shipping, Indies.
That's right. Everybody have a great, productive week, and we'll see you next week on Creative Juice.
East Coast, West Coast.